Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Kim Daniels, and I'm the director of Georgetown's Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. Given the weather here in Washington, we're so happy to have so many of you here with us in person in this ICC auditorium. And I also want to say a special welcome to those of you who are joining us online. We've had a remarkable response to this timely dialogue with some 3,700 people watching tonight. So the Trump administration's early executive orders on immigration and refugee issues pose serious threats to the lives and dignity of families in the United States and those waiting to be admitted to the country. Among them are a pledge on massive deportations and steps to carry them out, immigration raids permitted in places of worship, as well as schools and hospitals, an immediate halt to refugee resettlement, and an abrupt cancellation of thousands of already approved refugee admissions to the United States, the cancellation of legal status for hundreds of thousands of recently arrived immigrants, a halt to asylum access at the southern border, and many others. These actions present a moral, human, and pastoral challenge for Catholic and other faith communities and infringe on the ability of religious institutions to carry out their ministries to serve our neighbors in need. In a powerful and unprecedented letter he sent to the U.S. bishops yesterday discussing the Trump administration's migration policies, Pope Francis recognized the right of a nation to defend itself and keep communities safe. And at the same time, he powerfully contended that an authentic rule of law is verified precisely in the dignified treatment that all people deserve, especially the poorest and most marginalized. What is built on the basis of force, he said, and not on the truth about the equal dignity of every human being, begins badly and will end badly. So today we're going to discuss the moral dimensions, the human consequences, and the policy aspects of this administration's commitments and actions regarding migration, refugee resettlement, and mass deportation. We have 5 remarkable leaders gathered with us tonight and joining us. Bishop Mark Seitz is the Bishop of El Paso, Texas, on the U.S.-Mexico border, and he's the chairman of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Migration. As a pastor and a leader, he has been at the center of these issues. Christy DePena is the Senior Vice President of Policy and Director of Immigration Policy at the wonderful Niskanen Center, and was named one of the most influential people shaping policy in 2024 by Washingtonian Magazine. Aleja Hirschler McCain is a reporter for Religion News Service covering Latino faith and American Catholicism, and wrote a recent piece on fear and misinformation around mass deportation among religious congregations. She has previously reported at National Catholic Reporter and Sojourners. Beatriz Ortiz is a senior staff attorney at the International Rescue Committee, Baltimore, where she works with unaccompanied minors, and prior to IRC, she represented immigrants as a staff attorney at AYUDA. And Tim Schultz is the president of the First Amendment Partnership, where he works with faith groups to ensure that religious freedom is fully protected in the law. He chairs a broad and diverse coalition aimed at influencing federal policy and public opinion about the value of faith to the common good. And so before I get started, I also want to thank our colleagues at the Institute for the Study of International Migration in the Walsh School of Foreign Service for co-sponsoring this dialogue with us. And so now let me start by asking all of you an opening question. And we're going to start with you, Bishop Seitz. What's been the most significant effect of the Trump administration's migration policy changes on the lives of people and institutions in the United States?
Maybe I can begin then with just a really brief story because I think it sums it up. I was in our, what we call West Texas region of my diocese. My diocese is the farthest western point of Texas, right? And El Paso is at that point. But we have a huge rural area, and we call that West Texas, even though it's east. So I went out there and I celebrated Mass in some small rural parishes the weekend before last. And When I arrived at the church, some of the leaders of the parish came up to me and said, would it be all right if one of our members comes up and says something at the end of Mass? And then I asked them, well, what's this about? And they said, well, this young man has lived among us along with a couple of others who had also come to our community, who were from Colombia. And he wants to say goodbye to the community. So at the end of Mass, we invited him to come up. His name, as interestingly, was Jesus. And a young man, mid-20s, wearing kind of a jogging outfit. And he came up and said, expressed how grateful he was to that community for their warmth in receiving him and his other compatriots. He said, next weekend I'm flying back to Colombia because I've lost my parole, which allowed me to stay in the United States and pursue asylum. And he explained through an interpreter that he wasn't going to, stay in the midst of the fear that they now had in the immigrant community. And he then singled out a long list of parishioners who, by name, and he said, speaking really in his own words, I was hungry and you brought me to your home and fed me. I needed clothing. You shared your clothing. I needed a place to live and you opened your home to me. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. So that kind of story is being repeated throughout the immigrant community. Not everyone is choosing to leave, but many of them are saying, as bad as it was at home, as much as I was in fear of my life at home, I just can't live like this. Yeah.
Thank you. And we're seeing that fear, again, across the country. I'm struck by those of you here in the audience, so many friends and colleagues who serve migrants and refugees directly coming together here tonight in our auditorium, and I just want to say I'm so grateful for that. Christy, I want to turn to you now. What are you seeing as the most important impact of the Trump administration's migration policy changes right now?
Well, I think there's sort of two pieces. The first piece is to follow up on what Bishop Seitz said, which is really the technical side of the answer, which is that we are seeing policy changes happen at an extraordinary pace. We're seeing stronger enforcement. We've seen the elimination of the entire protection regime, that's TPS and parole and refugee status. And we've seen a pretty big overreach in tackling some of the values that make up our American system. We've seen an attack on birthright citizenship, which has been stymied by the courts in the meantime, and we are now sending migrants to Guantanamo Bay in a pretty unprecedented move. But I think I echo Bishop Seitz in saying that I think the most significant piece of this is that the impact is, and the longer lasting impact, is that this administration has really successfully chilled this entire space. They've chilled speech, they've chilled advocacy, and they've chilled even physical movement from people that don't feel safe to go to a hospital or a church or even schools. And I anticipate that we'll hear some more stories from some of the folks up here that have closer ties to some of the folks that are being impacted by this. The policy changes are certainly reversible, I think, but really reversing some of that fear and that chill is going to be a much, much longer lasting impact.
Thank you. Beatrice, let's go to you. What do you see as the impact that you're seeing of these changes in policy?
I am working through the fear of the immigrants right now. I work with children. I have from 4-year-olds to 18-year-olds. We had a client that was detained outside his school by ICE. We have clients that ICE has been surrounding their school, and in that case, the principal was, secure them and put them in the gym and in the cafeteria and waited for the ICE officers to go. But I am continuing to be an immigration attorney, but right now, what I'm working is kids that are not going to school, parents that are not going to the police if they are victims of a crime, people that need to go to an emergency room and they don't do it because they are fearful. So right now, I am working through fear.
Fear. Thank you.
Fear.
Thank you very much. Aleja, you're doing so much great reporting on this. What are you seeing as the biggest impact of the new policies?
Well, I think I'm going to sound like a broken record because absolutely there are so many concrete policy changes, and for the people the families whose family members have been arrested or deported, that's huge, right? But I would also say the fear is so prevalent in what I'm seeing, and I think a big driver of that fear in some ways is the change in the sensitive locations policy. So previously, ICE limited their enforcement actions in churches, schools, and hospitals. And I think it's important to say that we haven't seen large-scale raids in these places, which I think is what people are most afraid of. On my beat, there was a man who was arrested outside during his church service a few weeks ago, so it's not like there's nothing there. And also, even before this Trump administration, there were reports of parents being arrested right after dropping their kids off from school. So this policy has never been foolproof or super strictly followed, I guess. But I think the change is really making an impact. And on my beat, what we're seeing is a decline in attendance at churches. I think people might have mentioned some other things, but in other reporting, we're seeing immigrant businesses are suffering because people aren't going out. Schools are seeing declines in attendance. And then also with all of this, right, is with this level of fear, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So a lot of people are reporting ICE sightings that don't turn out to be true later, and that ramps up this fear. It becomes kind of a vicious cycle, and then people aren't going out even more. And with all of this, all these leaders of these institutions are having to pivot and put resources into working on this fear, and instead of the ministries that they had planned and the things that they plan to do this year.
Thank you. Tim, we've heard about a chilling effect. We've heard about fear, misinformation. What do you see as the most significant impact of the new Trump administration policies on migration and refugees?
Well, so in my world is the religious freedom world, and it's typical to think about religious freedom primarily as a legal issue, and it certainly is a legal issue, and we could talk about that in a little bit, but it's more than a legal issue. It really involves the bipartisan and cultural appreciation for the fact that faith and people and organizations of faith contribute dramatically to the common good. And that's most especially in spaces where faith-based entities, Catholic and otherwise, take care of vulnerable people, and they often do it with much more efficiency and compassion than the government can do standing alone. If that erodes, right, we have trouble with religious liberty, and we have seen attacks on what I just described from political progressives over the years who haven't always loved a lot of the values of these faith-based organizations who have done this work that I described. But now we're seeing attacks on this, at least rhetorical attacks, from the political right. And I think that is genuinely a new thing. It's been somewhat surprising to me. I've been pretty taken aback by it. I know the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops clearly has been too. And I think where this goes is anybody's guess, but I think that just a few days into the administration, that's the biggest thing that I have seen in my little slice of this issue.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Tim. That's going to be an important issue. I'm looking forward to talking more. Christy, let's go back to you for a little bit of a longer conversation. So you're the Director of Immigration Policy at the Niskanen Center. which is a leading policy think tank. You've been called one of the most influential people. I'm sorry to keep saying that. Can you, and now I'm going to ask you the impossible question. You know, we all know the system is broken. Can you give us some brief background on the immigration system, refugee resettlement process, and an overview of what's happening right now?
Absolutely. I mean, I can do my best. You know, I like that everybody starts by acknowledging that the system is broken. That has been a really effective message that the American people have learned from the advocates in Washington, D.C. and the grassroots organizations that are across America. But the second piece of that is that the immigration system absolutely can be fixed. And the American people, I think, in this past election showed that they have an interest in that. And maybe that interest wasn't placed precisely in the direction of finding that solution, but it is an important acknowledgement that there are pieces of our immigration system that just aren't working for anybody. They're not working if you are a legal immigrant. They are not working if you are an asylee. They are not working if you are a refugee seeking protection. So I do think that this is a moment of opportunity to really think about what the American people have said, but to also sort of lay out a vision for what that actually can and should look like. That's not necessarily what they are going to see for the next several years. So I'm going to oversimplify this, so nobody come at me. The US immigration system can kind of be broken down into three buckets. We think about it as kind of legal and economic migration. We think about the protection regime of asylees and refugees, and we think about family reunification. The legal and economic buckets include, you know, the H-1Bs that we keep hearing Elon Musk talk about that come in that are sponsored by an employer, the H-2 system where we have temporary workers coming in for agricultural jobs or construction jobs or jobs in forestry, and we have a lot of students that come to the United States. This entire system is fraught with many, many problems that you have probably heard way too much about in recent years. I think one of the biggest problems is that we have absolutely no path for the students that we are educating to remain and stay in the United States other than on an H-1B visa. And we only give out a very small number of those visas every year. It's through a lottery system, and that lottery system is usually out of slots within the first day, if not few hours, that it opens up to business leaders in America every year. So there's a lot going on there, but the biggest, I think, takeaway is that there's a lot of demand. There are a lot of students across the world that want to go to school in the US, or at least did. During the last Trump administration, we saw a pretty steep decline in the number of students coming in to attend universities in the United States. We may or may not see that again, but certainly there is a lot of demand on this system. The second system is about family reunification. If you are a US citizen or if you are a legal permanent resident, you are able to bring in certain family members if you would like them to come and be US citizens with you. Spouses, children, occasionally siblings, although the backlogs for many of those categories are so backlogged they will never get a visa in their lifetime, even if they applied the very first day that they were born. Some of these backlogs for certain countries are well over 100 years. Some are up into 130 or 140-year backlogs. You also hear problems about our family reunification. I'm sure that you have all heard the concerns about chain migration, which rebuts this idea that there are extremely long wait lines for many, many of these categories, although for spouses and children it is relatively quick. And then the last bucket is probably the one that we have heard so much about in recent years, which covers asylees. Those are people that are seeking protection and they come to the US border. You can only apply for asylum on US soil. Then refugees, which apply for protection abroad. They usually do it through UNHCR. And for a while, we're doing it through the safe mobility offices that the Biden administration stood up in parts of Central and South America. In that bucket, I also put in some of the temporary protections that we have in place, like temporary protected status, TPS, parole, which offered temporary protection to millions of people during the Biden administration that will likely be rolled back. And I think Dreamers, sort of. They span many categories, but I put them in this category just to bring up. There are myriad problems with all of these systems that I think most folks really understand and they want to address. But there's problems with the treatment of asylum seekers, parole entrants, and the legality of parole at these numbers, which we have seen folks talk about for the entirety of the Biden administration, and then concerns, of course, about child labor and who is sponsoring children that come in unaccompanied. These are not clean lines, but they help sort of explain where all of these pieces come from. We know that people don't just come here for work. They often have families. People that come here to see their families often work. Some of them have experienced violence and trauma throughout their entire lives, but are also PhDs. So none of these are clean lines, and it's really important to understand that most people coming to the United States are as dynamic as the people that live here.
Let me follow up on that.
Sure.
That was wonderful, and thank you for giving us a quick primer on all of this. So what's changed? What's happened in the past few weeks? And in particular, can you focus on mass deportation, since that was such a focus of the campaign and a lot of the rhetoric? What are the social effects of that? What are we seeing?
Yes, so there have been, I think by my count, about 87 or 89 executive orders or memos since the beginning of the Trump administration. I believe that has surpassed any other president that we have seen before President Trump. Many of them, I don't know the exact number, many of them touch on some aspect of immigration. So to get to your question, Kim, those are the biggest changes that we have seen, and they've been, like I said before, incredibly swift in changing the landscape for how people come into the United States. And if you look at Project 2025, which is really the blueprint for what this administration promised to do, but then said they weren't going to do during the campaign, but are doing right now, you can see that this is really only the tip of the iceberg. There will be more changes to legal migration than we have seen to date. So on mass deportations, much has been said, but we don't know exactly how much they're going to be able to accomplish. We do have a large undocumented population. About 2.5 million of those people are people that have been here for more than 20 years, which is an important number to keep in mind as you're thinking about how this administration is going to really prioritize, or if they're going to be able to prioritize who they are removing and when. So they have hit about 8,000-ish deportations. But I want to emphasize one point, because I do see that folks are sort of conflating some of these ideas when they talk about mass deportation. It is much easier to deport somebody who has a criminal conviction. They often already have orders of deportation and they can move forward. If you have orders of deportation or removal, it is very easy, arguably, to get those people deported from the United States once you work with their countries of origin. What is much more difficult, and what I anticipate that we will see in the coming weeks and months, is the detention of people, which does not equal the deportation. For now, we have due process, and it is going to take a long time to get through the backlogs that we have in our current immigration court system to get to all of these cases of detention. So right now our backlogs are sitting at about 3.5 million pending cases. We have 700 immigration judges. I can't do the math. I'm sure somebody here or at home can do the math. But that's going to take quite a while to get through. So even though there are going to be big problems with detention, we have lots of concerns about detaining people across this country and certainly putting them in Guantanamo Bay. It is important to recognize that there is going to be a difference between detaining large numbers of people and actually effectuating their deportation.
Thank you. Thanks for that great background on where we are and what the policy is. Bishop Seitz, I want to turn to you as a pastor. And as we've talked about, you are, the U.S. bishops elected you the head of the Committee on Migration. You minister to a very diverse Catholic community in El Paso, of course, and there are very real challenges there. Pope Francis has said to you, and I love this, he says, I don't know if he's conservative, I don't know if he's progressive, if he is of the right or the left, I don't know, but he's a good pastor. And I think that's how we think of you, right? So let me ask you this. In late January, Vice President Vance, who is a Catholic, claimed that the U.S. bishops, in their efforts to assist migrants, weren't worried about humanitarian concerns, but are actually worried about their bottom line. He later implied that our refugee resettlement programs facilitate human trafficking and other crimes. So as a bishop, what's your reaction to that? What's your reaction to those words? And why don't you tell us a little bit about the humanitarian work that you do?
Okay. Well, thank you. First of all, those words of Pope Francis, if anybody would try to pen the greatest compliment you could imagine, and from one of the greatest people you could imagine, that it was from him. And I think he captured something very important, really, that applies to every bishop I know. We are people who are believers. We deeply believe the gospel. We deeply believe the teaching of the church. We have made sacrifices in order to do this ministry. Some of us might have even been successful in other occupations. We felt called to serve God. The characterization of a bishop or a group of bishops as people who are more concerned about the bottom line, as he said, than to serve people is a tremendous mischaracterization. He clearly doesn't know me. He doesn't know my heart. I've commented in regard to those comments that I would love to sit down sometime with Vice President Vance and talk to him about these issues in regard to our resettlement work and things like that, because he clearly has been misinformed. And that's so unfortunate, and when it comes from a person who has a loud megaphone right now, it can be very, very harmful to this work of the church, to very vulnerable people. So it really is concerning. As you mentioned earlier, Pope Francis has once again come forward and spoken in a certain way on our behalf with an eloquence that few of us can. I'd certainly encourage everyone who's listening to this, if you haven't had the chance to read his relatively short letter, it's 3 typed pages, please do. It's a beautiful summary. It gives the reasons behind our work. It's one thing beautiful about the church is we've had 2,000 years to think about these things, and there's a beautifully developed theology that grows right out of the gospel and goes right back to the gospel that is one of the richest treasures of the church. And so in a certain way, I never would have guessed that I would find myself doing this work in a certain sense. I felt called to be a parish priest, and never could have anticipated. I fell in love with the Latino community in Dallas, where I served, and worked among them, and gained so much from them and from work in our sister parishes in Mexico and Honduras. I realized that the people who come across the border, they come across for reasons of very serious reasons. I mean, they love their home. They love their home like any person loves where they live, but they found it unlivable. They dealt with threats against their life, against their children, being told by organized groups to leave their home. They have 24 hours. They looked for a place of refuge, which, by the way, is there anyone listening who would not do the same to save your life or your family? If you had to, would you just say, well, I'm sorry, you know, this is where I belong. I don't have permission to go someplace safe. You know, no, we do what we could do. If the house is on fire, you jump out of the window if you have to. You know,
Sure.
I wish people would really understand our immigrant brothers and sisters.
Well, I'd like to follow up on that a little bit. You're the spiritual leader of a community in El Paso, the Catholic community in El Paso. As the head of the bishop's efforts on migration, you have a window into what's happening across the country. Can you let us know a little bit about how it's affecting people's spiritual lives, how it's affecting the pastoral concerns you approach with? What are you seeing on the ground in El Paso and in your travels?
Well, of course, being in El Paso, we're very close to these issues. We had a shelter that operated right at our pastoral center. We had a hall that converted when the flow was such that the regular shelters were not adequate. So I've had the chance to really meet so many coming through and hear their stories and walk with them a bit in their life. And as I visit other places in the country, I've had the chance in my role to visit some of the sheltering work and assistance for those who are recently arrived. And I've seen, for one thing, her heroism on the part of people in the church, you know, and not only our church, but I'm biased. That's what I see most often, you know. And so many people who just have had a heart for them and have made great sacrifices to serve. But the people themselves are traumatized by what happened in their home country. They're traumatized by what happened on their journey. People from Venezuela traveled 3,000 miles, much of it by foot, through one of the most dangerous jungle areas in the world in order to get here. We have a Venezuelan family to whom I've become very close. They traveled with the two parents in their early 30s, two young children, 4 and 2 at the time. The grandmother of the mother of these children, who was 70 at the time, and the mother was expecting a baby, 7 months old. The father worked for a judge in Venezuela, and it came to a point where he could no longer, in conscience, continue to do this work for this corrupt regime, and so they decided they had to leave. After he quit, they started receiving threats. I shouldn't have left that out. And so they fled along that journey. When they arrived, the day they arrived, the mother gave birth to the baby. There's a much longer story I don't have time to share with you. But the trauma is there, and right now, not only mom and dad are worried, but the child who is I believe now is in 2nd grade, 7 years old. The kids have both learned a lot of English. But whenever he sees that there's a police car outside his house, he's freaking out. You know, he doesn't, the parents have a hard time to calm him down. They have TPS. They're still protected until April.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that the beautiful letter that you referred to from Pope Francis really talks about keeping the human faces of people in front of us as we have these very difficult conversations. Beatrice, I want to turn to you to kind of continue that. You know, you're an immigration attorney. You've worked in various areas of immigration law with clients who have little or no ability to pay. You work primarily right now with children who have arrived in the U.S. unaccompanied by their parents. So Catholic social teaching says, pay special attention to the most vulnerable among us. It's hard to think of people who are more vulnerable than unaccompanied children. What are the particular vulnerabilities that they face, both in their places of origin and while migrating and here in the system? What kind of support systems are there for them?
I want to start explaining what an accompanied minor is. So this is a minor that entered the United States without a mother or a father. Sometimes they are with aunts or sisters or brothers, but they don't have a guardian. So they are put in this special position that they are unaccompanied minors. And ICE doesn't have jurisdiction over them because there was a decision in 1985 from the Supreme Court that said that minors needed to be separate from the other immigrants that were detained. So that means that they go to shelters, that the ORR has jurisdiction over them. And what the shelters do is try to look for a sponsor. Sometimes those minors have a mother or a father, or if there's no mother or father, they have some family member that can take care of them, or a friend of the family. So after ORR or the shelter...
Can you tell everybody what ORR is? I'm sorry.
Office of Resettlement Refugees. When ORR finds a sponsor and gives the child to a sponsor, the responsibility of ORR finishes. Mm-hmm. So right now, we in the nonprofit world have funding, as of today at least, to give those children an intake, sometimes case management. When I have a child, I sit with the child and see what kind of relief they have in the United States. And I also see what other needs the child has, because I have resources to make sure that the person that is with them is treating them well, that they are registered in school, that they are doing good in school, that they are going to school. I look for relief for that child. I look for if they have been persecuted in their home country, if they have maybe asylum, what happened in the journey. Sometimes they are trafficked in the journey because they are coming alone. If they have been victims of crime, they could have a humanitarian visa. So it depends on the child. And right now, we have the resources to give those children the services that they need. I don't know what's going to happen in the future.
And what I heard you say is that you and organizations like yours are groups that help children, that keep them from traffickers, that keep them safe in these dangerous situations. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate, because I am the legal representative of the child. My responsibility as an attorney is not with the sponsor, is not with the family. I am the legal representative of that child. So that's my responsibility.
Your legal responsibility. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you a little bit more. What are you and your colleagues seeing in the families, among the children that you serve? How are these statements, how are these actions affecting them? How will it affect the legal processes that you're engaged in?
It's the fear. The problem is the fear. We as immigration attorneys are not dealing with different laws. The laws haven't changed, really. Mm-hmm. The policies may affect the laws, but the laws are the same. So if I have a client that can apply for asylum or could have applied for asylum before January, he or she is going to be able to apply for asylum right now. The thing is, we are worried about the well-being of those children right now, about we are making sure that they go to school, that they go to the doctor, that they are doing what they should do. They are children. So that's our worry. What is going to happen if we do not have the funding to give those children the services?
Thank you. Aleja, and thank you for your work. Aleja, let's turn to you. You're a reporter writing for Religion News Service. You cover Catholicism in the United States and Latino faith communities. You've covered some of the Catholic bishops' responses to the administration's actions and threats and challenges, and especially the criticisms from Vice President Vance. How have the Conference of Bishops, individual bishops, other Catholic leaders responded or not responded to these actions and attacks? And what about the administration and the broader public?
So I'd love to start by giving a brief recent history of some of the accusations that Vice President Vance made on TV. And I think an important and key figure in understanding these is Texas Representative Lance Gooden. Since at least 2021, he's been making claims that nonprofits at the border are secretive, that they're engaged in something nefarious. And in 2022, that escalated to accusing Catholic charities of facilitating or fueling illegal immigration. And so since then, those kind of accusations have been picked up by right-wing influencers, by other Republicans, by some fringe Catholic groups who don't particularly like the bishops very much. And with and with all of that, some themes in these accusations is that they're pretty vague and unspecific. They lack evidence, but they tend to suggest that there's something secretive going on, that there's something illegal going on, and they tend to equate humanitarian work with facilitating illegal immigration. And because of all of this, just last year, my colleague Jack Jenkins and I reported on the threats Catholic charities and Catholic charity staffers were receiving. Also, because of this, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has opened several investigations into different nonprofits, some of them Catholic, who serve migrants. And one Texas judge called one of his investigations harassment and unconstitutional. So that gives you a bit of an idea of kind of what led up to what Vice President Vance said on TV. Even back as far as 2023, the USCCB had on its website an explainer debunking some of these claims, right? So the explainer says the church doesn't support open borders. It says that there's no evidence that humanitarian work fuels illegal immigration, and also that the church doesn't profit off of federal grants they receive to do that work. So there's been an ongoing response, but obviously with the election of President Trump and all of these new policy changes, there have been new responses. And many bishops have spoken out very vocally against these policy changes. There also another widespread response has been distributing Know Your Rights information to immigrant parishioners. Specifically, Bishop Seitz, Cardinals Tobin and Cardinal McElroy have all done interfaith services in solidarity with migrants in the past couple weeks. And then beyond that, there's been some advocacy. So I heard before the panel that Bishop Seitz met with lawmakers earlier today, and also that we knew a few weeks back at the Catholic Social Ministry Gathering, USCCB officials prepped participants to go and advocate to lawmakers for humanitarian protections for migrants. So there's been a whole lot of types of responses. One type I'd like to especially highlight is more of a grassroots response that many bishops have supported, which is congregational IDs or parish IDs. And so this came out of the last Trump administration, out of the Industrial Areas Foundation in Dallas. And the idea is that after securing the agreement of local law enforcement to recognize the IDs that congregations can create and distribute to their congregants, identification for them to carry around. And the hope is that those people will then feel more like they belong in their communities, more comfortable getting out and participating. Like I said earlier, that many people don't feel comfortable right now, and that they'll be more confident in interacting with local law enforcement. And to be clear there, that doesn't give you license to commit crimes or anything like that.
Thank you. Well, let me ask you, you recently wrote about the reaction and responses from various different religious congregations to the possibility of ICE enforcement actions in their religious spaces. What are some of the concerns that you've seen in the course of your reporting, and how are congregations responding?
So as I said earlier, we had one arrest take place during a church service at Iglesia Fuente de Vida in Georgia a few weekends back. And this was a Honduran asylum seeker who had arrived fairly recently. He had an ICE ankle bracelet, ankle monitor, which many recent arrivals have, and it started going off during the service. And so he stepped outside of the church building, not to disturb what was going on, and then was arrested. And so after that, of course, I reached out to many different faith leaders who work with immigrants to see what their responses would be to plan for these type of arrests or even bigger ICE raids, which I think a lot of people are fearing. And unfortunately for this audience, when I reached out to Catholic leaders, I didn't get much of a response. I will say that Catholic leaders and bishops are a lot more cautious in how they interact with the media compared to Protestants. And I think specifically on this issue, there may be a fear of drawing a target on their diocese or kind of further inflaming relationships with the Trump administration. So I mostly just talked to Latino Protestants, although some other faith leaders as well. And one thing I'd like to highlight was a webinar by the National Latino Evangelical Coalition. And so they had it was widely attended, and they had a lot of different advice for church leaders. Specifically, they were helping train them and have them do trainings for members of their congregations. So ideally, a citizen member learns how to speak clearly and respectfully with ICE and de-escalate any situations if an ICE raid occurs. Additionally, they're training children's pastors for what to do if the children are separated from their parents and an ICE raid occurs. Beyond that, just like Catholics, they're distributing Know Your Rights information. And also updating pastors on the legal situation and landscape. I think one thing they've been explaining is that public worship spaces, ICE does not need a warrant to enter them, but church schools or other private spaces, ICE would need a warrant. So making sure people understand all of that landscape. But even with that legal advice, we know that there are quite a few pastors across the US who are holding services with doors locked. And a lot of fear there. I will also say that I, in addition to all of this, spoke with a Latino evangelical leader who's quite close to Trump, and his kind of perspective on all of this was a little different. He believes firmly that the people in his congregation who've been here for decades will not be deported, and that if there's going to be an ICE raid or arrest in a church, it'll be because someone is the worst of the worst type of criminal. So that was an interesting perspective, although he did admit that the people he's involved with have seen attendance drop in their churches.
Thanks, Aleja. Tim, let me turn to you. So we've heard about threats to Catholic charities. We've heard about fear in communities. You work regularly with faith groups to protect their constitutional rights to freely exercise their religion. You and I have known each other for a long time. We used to do this work together. The challenges for the Catholic Church in this context are several, right? There are threats to our legal ability to provide humanitarian assistance. There's a new policy, as we've been talking about, that permits ICE and others to enter churches to apprehend immigrants. We've talked about the rhetorical effects and misinformation and how that basically that causes fear. So what are the impacts of these actions on the religious freedom of the church and its leaders and its ministers and its workers and all of us?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a short answer to this one, and that is that when you talk to actual religious leaders about what does religious freedom mean to you, their answers almost never have to do with the law. They almost always have to do with the right to serve, the right to take care of vulnerable people, the right to live out their faith. That's why we use the term free exercise of religion. Exercise, it's a great term for what the freedom of religion really is about. And I think that when you have less of that exercise, you have less of a just society. There was a study that came out, it was connected about 6 years ago, Georgetown University, about the value of faith to religion in the United States. Put the value, as an economist who did this, at $1.2 trillion a year. That's the amount of value that religion, I mean, you can barely even get your arms around a number like that. Having less of that value created by religion is bad for the common good, and that's particularly true in a society that is becoming more secular and that has fewer and fewer mediating institutions, fewer bowling leagues, fewer little leagues, fewer civic service organizations that bring people together. So having less religion, less exercise of religion is bad for a society filled with loneliness and with fewer mediating institutions.
Thank you. And I think that's so important, right? It's how faith actors work, what we contribute to, what faith organizations and faith communities contribute to the common good. And ultimately, and I know you know this, Bishop cites the freedom to serve. That's what this is about. Help us think, though, Tim, about the rights of churches when it comes to exercising pastoral obligations in their places of worship, but also outside their places of worship. The Christian obligation to help your neighbor, to love your neighbor. How do we think about that in this context?
So this is the part of our program where I am going to exercise my freedom of religion as somebody who attended Georgetown University Law Center and talk about the law just a little bit.
Sure.
Okay.
We love it.
And the short version is Bill Clinton signed a law in 1993 in the Rose Garden called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and it applies to all actions of the federal government. And he gave a layperson's description of it when he said government has to have a really good reason before it interferes with your free exercise of religion, right? So just going to give you a famous case, the Hobby Lobby case. Remember that one? That was a few years ago. A lot of people on the political left were very unhappy about the outcome of that case because what the Supreme Court said in that case is, well, the government may, they sort of said they may have a right to sort of guarantee that these contraceptives are going to people that want them, but they can't commandeer this organization that opposes that. They can't force them against their wishes, because this is what the court said. They said if they really wanted to get those products to women, they had other ways to do that other than sort of forcing that particular organization, or there was later litigation around the Little Sisters of the Poor. They don't have to force the Little Sisters of the Poor to be the ones to provide that. There's other ways you can get that done. So I don't know what's going to happen with the law in all these cases, but I can tell you this. I think we're going to see the Religious Freedom Restoration Act start to get really popular with more progressive people who have been skeptical about it in the Hobby Lobby case, right? And you're going to see people on the right who used to really love the Religious Freedom Restoration Act are going to see what happens when the Supreme Court says you have other ways to enforce immigration law that don't involve the kinds of enforcement in and around churches, right, that are really not truly the least restrictive means, is the term that the statute uses, to effectuate that public policy. So as with everything with the First Amendment, 15 or 20 years ago, if you said I'm a First Amendment person or if I'm a free exercise of religion person, people thought you were progressive. Now when I tell people, at a party, well, I work on the free exercise of religion, they're like, oh, you're conservative. And I'm like, no, just you wait a couple years, right? The First Amendment and the free exercise of religion tends to offend the people that are in power. And I think we're kind of back to a place where the free exercise of religion is about to offend people in power. In this case, it's the people in power who are more politically conservative.
Well, one last question. You talked about the common good and how faith organizations contribute to the common good. One way, and we used to talk about this a lot in the early 2000s, is the value of public-private partnerships, right? Of faith organizations doing what they do, like resettling refugees is one example.
Yep.
Have you seen that in your work? And tell us a little bit about the legality of that, partnering between the government and religious institutions, partnering to advance the common good.
Yeah, so there were a lot of threats to that originally from progressives who said this would violate the separation of church and state. They would say it's an establishment of religion that is unconstitutional. And I'm glad, I think progressive litigators mostly lost those cases. So there's just this huge trove of research about the way that these groups have contributed to the common good using these kinds of arrangements. Kim was involved back when she worked for the Bishops' Conference with an organization called Faith Counts. That's a multi-faith organization that the bishops are partners, founding partners in, that really documents all of these various ways that faith contributes to the common good. And generally, the courts have found that these kinds of arrangements are constitutional, and politicians have found that faith-based groups generally deliver for the vulnerable with more compassion and at a lower cost than government acting alone. So it's been a really great arrangement for a lot of different people. And I think that threats to that have not typically come from the political right. We're now seeing that. I'm pretty concerned about it.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask one more question, and Christy, it's going to be to you, so hold on one second. But after that, we're going to go to questions from the audience. We have a lot of people here, and thank you for coming out in this weather and everything else, and we'll have microphones going around. But Christy, what I'd like to ask you first, before we get to others, how do the deportation plans that the Trump administration is effectuating differ from those of other administrations, other presidents, in terms of the effects on the lives of undocumented people here? How are they different?
Well, they will likely be different in scale, certainly. Although, again, we all think this is happening. It is what the administration has talked about throughout the campaign, and certainly has tried to effectuate it via all of the executive orders that have happened so far. Whether that really comes to fruition at the scale that has been promised is a really big question mark. I know that there are many, many amazing attorneys across the country who are getting all suited up and ready to take on as many of these cases as they possibly can. But this is a slow process. If you've ever been involved in the court system in America, you know that this is a very slow and deliberative process, and that was done on purpose. A lot of people will likely be deported after they have been detained. But again, those numbers may not reach the numbers that we saw under the Obama administration, when we reached about 2 million deportations, which is very high. And we have gotten close in some instances to some of those numbers, but never quite that high. And 8,000 so far is a high number for 3 weeks, but we don't know how that slows once some of the kind of easier cases are ticked off the top of that list. And there are easy cases to tick off that list. We don't want violent, dangerous criminals in the United States. We do want those people to be deported, but it's really going to come into the gray area. We're talking about millions and millions of people who really have never done anything wrong, except, I think, like Bishop Seitz said, they want to come here and get opportunities for their families and be safe. So I think the effects of those policies are the same across the board of any administration, but all of these speakers, I think, have really beautifully highlighted them. I don't have anything to add.
Well, and I think, thank you, that was very helpful. Beatrice, I'd love to talk to you before we go to everybody. Like, how does it feel different on the ground for you? How does it feel different for the people you're serving right now? We've talked a lot about fear, we've talked about other things. How does that feel different?
I feel that January had 865 days, more or less. Every time I wake up, I don't want to hear the news. I receive a lot of emails of what's happening with my kiddos every day. So it's hard. It's hard. I have a commitment to immigrants. I have made my life a commitment to immigrants. So I'm going to continue to do this as long as I can. But it's hard because right now I'm working with children. Children are, for the most part, are not criminals. They are alone. They need support. They need resources. They need to go to school. We need to know what happened to them in their home country. We need to protect them. We need them to be safe.
Thank you. All right, let's go to questions from the audience. And when I call on you, please identify yourself. And in the words of my wonderful colleague, John Carr, please state your question in the form of a question. All right, let's come over here and to Christian.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Christian. I'm a local Washingtonian. I have a question. The Catholic Church has a huge mission with humanitarian work, and there is a white Christian nationalist attack to exclude immigrants from our society. And this is not the first time we've seen that. During the Civil Rights Movement, the KKK was very open about being anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, anti-integration. Are we looking at the history of that civil rights work done then to give us the courage, the strength, and I think most importantly, the hope that the Catholic Church and its allies play a huge role in helping people. The KKK wore hoods at a certain time in our history. Today, they do not. But the ideology is still very active, and they are attacking Catholic institutions, humanitarian work, people of color, and immigrants. And so are we looking at our history to gun, one, what are the steps that we did for success? But two, also to hope we overcame that, which is why we're where we're at today.
Bishop Seitz, let me go to you at that. How do you look at our history of involvement in the civil rights movement? What kind of lessons do you draw for Catholics?
Well, let me begin by just
Sure.
speaking personally. I thought we had been there and done that, that we had overcome the prejudice and much of the discrimination in our society. That was my idealistic view on things. But it seems that this current situation has given free rein to those who still hold a prejudicial view. And somehow people feel justified and enabled to say things that they might have kept to themselves before, but now people are expressing it. And so I don't certainly want to characterize everyone who is, has just heard nothing but a drumbeat of fear-mongering and untruth about our immigrant community, and then react with fear as though they are prejudiced. But there are certainly groups that are, and individuals that are. Just last week in El Paso, 2 of our Jewish synagogues were painted with swastikas. You just see more and more of this kind of stuff mixed in. But the rhetoric from leaders opens the door because it doesn't distinguish. It calls all immigrants criminals rather than criminals. It says they are rapists, etc. And that allows many to hear that at least and say, if the person's brown, they're bad.
And the horrible language we've heard, right? Vermin. I mean, I can't even, so much of that has
Yes.
been part of the campaign and what we've heard. Aleha, I wonder if you've seen any of this in your reporting. Have you seen a change over time? I mean, what's your reaction to that? What have you seen?
A change over
A
time.
change in kind of people's ability, willingness to speak in these kinds of terms around about migrants, or do you feel like there's more openness, or with hatred, with division, with name calling, with racism?
Well, I think maybe because of how rapidly elections change who's on TV more often, people might perceive it to be that way. But I would guess that over years, this stuff builds, right? So we definitely heard that kind of language during the first Trump administration. It didn't go away during the Biden administration in the meantime.
So you've seen it for a while.
Yeah, I would say it has longer roots.
Thank you. Other questions? Let's go over to this side. Please let us know your name and where you're from.
Yes. My name is Frank. I'm from Northern Virginia, so local to the DMV. Good evening, Your Excellency. Thank you for visiting Georgetown. And so, given we're at a Jesuit school, I thought it would be somewhat appropriate to use the Ignatian presupposition for J.D. Vance's comments, specifically on invoking Augustine's Ordo Amoris. So I would say, of course, it makes very much sense to protect refugees, protect people who live in a difficult situation, who have no other choice but to come to the United States. But is there a legitimate concern in his using of Ordo Amoris to say, hey, maybe it isn't our responsibility to necessarily take in everyone who seeks to be an American?
Thank you. I'm really glad you asked that question. Thanks very much. Because there is, right? I mean, we all have this natural feeling like, I know I would protect my children first and foremost, and my family. And Pope Francis really talks about this, right? In this Ordo Amoris, this idea that we protect people closest to us first. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how we expand that circle and how you might respond to this?
Well, Pope Francis specifically raises these issues in his letter, so I'll refer you to that. He says that if we are to really understand the Ordo Amoris, we need to go back to the parable of the Good Samaritan. So as Jesus so often did, he turns upside down the familiar kind of wisdom that people seem to operate under. He's certainly not saying we shouldn't love our family in a special way, but Christian love is outgoing. It is not what one might expect. It says radical, crazy things like love your enemy, and not only love one another, as they love you, but rather love one another as I have loved you. And so there's so many examples in the scripture where I think if I were to put words, I don't want to put words in Jesus' mouth, but I think he when people come up to him and say, your family and your brothers and sisters are out there looking for you, Jesus says, who are my mother and my brothers? He turns it upside down and he says, the only way that humanity is going to get over these divisions and this hatred and so on is if they recognize that person who is vulnerable, that person whom you have trouble loving, that's the one you're called to love. The rest will take care of itself.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Amen. Other questions? Let's go ahead, Bill, please. And please identify yourselves and talk. Bill Canny. It's so grateful for all your work.
Bill Canny with USCCB, Migration and Refugee Services, working with Bishop Seitz. So the Pope said in his message that, when we begin with hate and harm against human dignity, that's a bad way to begin and it will end badly. As someone involved in this now, a bit over the shock, trying to figure out where this will go, trying to navigate this, seeing Musk, the courts, the president, can anyone take a shot at where this will end?
Sorry. Great question. Great question. So, Christy, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Help us start off and think, how do you see the next 2 years going, the next year or 2 years? What do you see ahead of us? And I put any kind of timeline on it you want.
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. I do think it's an important question, and I think a lot of it is really dependent on the American people. You can answer technically and say, well, the courts are going to intervene here, and Congress may intervene here, and we'll see a Supreme Court decision then. But really, I think it is about what the American people are willing to tolerate, and sort of where they believe that the administration hits an overreach, if they do hit an overreach. Have they gone too far on deportations? Are they separating families again? Of course, we saw the power of the American people in their response during the first Trump administration. Even people that were really Trump supporters said, "Ooh, we don't like separating families," and that ended almost overnight. While there were still some lingering repercussions that I don't want to diminish. But I do think that there is a point where the American people sort of find themselves saying, ooh, that's not what America is about. And so far we have seen us step up in those instances. When exactly? that turning point will happen, I certainly couldn't guess. But I do think that there will be these sort of inflection points where America steps up and says, we did want order, we do want a more intentional immigration system, we want to think about how people seek protection in the United States. Those are all really valid things, but we don't want to do it this way. We want to look for a different solution. And so my sense of things is that we will see some of those inflection points in the next 6 months or a year or 2 years or 4 years, depending on how quickly and to what extent some of these policies really move.
Where we ask ourselves, what is America about? Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Student over here. Go ahead. Sorry, right there. You go ahead. Yeah, sure. No.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Molly. I'm a first-year student in the Masters of Global Human Development program. Prior to coming to Georgetown, I worked as a paralegal supporting asylum seekers in the U.S. and following that, working on democracy, human rights, and governance programs across the world, but specifically in Central America. So my question is more about the role of mercy and rehabilitation in this conversation. Christy, I know you were mentioning, of course, the kind of priority of wanting to make sure that the U.S. stays safe, and the understandable desire to deport kind of dangerous or criminal migrants. And Beatriz, you were mentioning the risk of increasing detention here as we see what happens. And I know we talk a lot about kind of the dangerous or criminal migrants, but we know that this is a really small fraction of the immigrants that actually come to the U.S. And evidence has shown that a lot of criminal activity in Central America actually originated with immigrants here in the United States who were then deported, specifically MS-13, and immigrants being deported back to El Salvador, and that can kind of spur that cyclical violence. So I'm kind of wondering, I guess, what any of you think of the role of rehabilitation programs for maybe those quote-unquote criminal migrants who are here in the U.S. I know we have a great example with Father Greg Boyle in LA with Homeboy Industries. So curious how you see either the role of the Catholic Church in that, or just in general, what we can do in that question.
Bishop Seitz, can we go to you with that? How do you see the role of mercy, rehabilitation, et cetera?
Oh, I'm really glad you asked that question, because I think we're so overwhelmed in a sense by the force of this policy of the new administration, although the antecedents were already present in the Democratic administration. What we have done is we have very effectively dehumanized the immigrant, and we can even more effectively dehumanize the person who committed a crime. And we really do have to ask the question, what is our responsibility, certainly as Christians, but even as members of a country that wants to be a just country? What is the proper approach to people? Is it really okay to say these people are so bad, we're going to ship them to Guantanamo Bay and forget about them without a trial, without even a due process, much less an effort to rehabilitate them? And frankly, if you want to look from the standpoint of self-interest, you're not fulfilling self-interest either when you put people in a situation where they're constantly made worse than they were before because of the way they were incarcerated.
Thank you. Thanks for that. We're getting close to our time, and so I want to ask one question of everybody as we wrap it up. And that question is, in light of everything we've talked about, what can people here do to stand in solidarity with migrants and refugees to help contribute to protecting lives and dignity of others from what you've seen, from what we've talked about? Let's start with you, Aleja.
Well, as a journalist, I am not in the business of advising advocates, but I'll take this opportunity to talk about another response that faith communities have had to President Trump's migration policy that I haven't talked about yet, which is that in the past week or a little bit longer, we've seen a couple lawsuits emerge, or 3 lawsuits, I should be more specific. So we've seen 2 lawsuits representing 30 different faith groups, specifically targeting this sensitive locations policy, saying that it infringes on their First Amendment rights. So those groups have included Mennonites, Quakers, Sikhs, Jews, other Protestants, Unitarian Universalists. So it's a really wide coalition that's been involved in 2 separate lawsuits there. And then one other lawsuit of different faith groups involved in refugee resettlement, saying that President Trump doesn't have the authority to halt the program the way that he has. So far, Catholics haven't been involved in any of them, but I think it's interesting to be aware of what people are up to.
Thank you. Aleha, what can people who are listening, who are here with us, what can they do in response to what we've talked about tonight? Like, what can they do? Aleha, I'm sorry.
No, you're okay. I thought it was a
I'm
follow-up
looking at my
question.
paper
No,
and
that's like, totally okay.
Gotta come with the second one.
You know, I think it's a simple answer and probably a little unsatisfying, but your lawmakers listen to you when you call. They take all of those notes. Those messages do get up to them. They want to hear from you, whether your lawmaker is a Republican, whether your lawmaker is a Democrat, or somewhere in between. They want to hear from you. So if this is something that you care about, or you have a thought about one policy or another, make the call and tell them what you think. And if you don't think that you have been heard, call again and get your friends to call again, because I think that is one really impactful way that you can make your voice heard.
Thank you. Thanks, Christy. Tim, we're going to start down there with you, go to you, and then come back. What do you think one thing people watching can do in response to what
I'm just glad we're at an institution where I can give this answer. So I actually think there's so much information flying around. It's so hard to sort out what's true and what isn't. And I think we just need to pray for wisdom before we engage these issues. I think we need to pray for wisdom. And I also, to this gentleman's question earlier about the resurgence of some of the very darkest parts of our history, yeah, principalities and powers are a thing we really actually believe in, and we are in a battle against them and praying both for wisdom and how we move into the world, but also just against the forces that really are even darker than we can fathom. I think realizing that there's a spiritual dimension to all of this and praying for wisdom and for God's authority over those powers of evil that really do exist in our world. I know I'm not the pastor up here, but I think that
great job, Keith.
I think that these just are things that are true. If you're Catholic or any other, I'm an Anglican, but I just think these are real ways that these are our first tools, not our tools of last resort.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, obviously, I think prayer should be at the center of what we do. And I'm so glad that you brought up the Ignatian presupposition back there, because I think that it's just so important to remember also, if we're here at a Jesuit school, to talk about responding to everybody with generosity here and giving the best, thinking that people are working from that place when we try to engage in these difficult conversations. So thank you for that, too. Beatrice, what do you think about when we talk about responding to what we've heard here tonight? People who are watching, people who are here.
Yeah, I would say if you are going to choose this cause, you have to choose a cause right now, because so many things are happening. This is mine, and learn how to share moments with immigrants. Immigrants are, for the most part, good people. They come here to work, they come here to be safe, you're going to find that there's a human being there that went through, even in the best journey, went through so much, and there's a different human here that just wants to be safe. They want to work. They want their children to be safe. They want their children to learn. They want to be healthy. So maybe if this is your cause, maybe take time to meet them and talk to them and understand them and understand their journey because they are human and they need our solidarity.
Amen.
Thank you. Bishop Seitz, how can we leave here tonight? What should we take away?
Some wonderful last comments, I think, from my fellow panelists. And I think it's so important at this moment, we who do see the seriousness of these issues, do not allow ourselves to become embittered. You know, we cannot allow ourselves to be reduced to a level where we're seeing everyone as our enemy. And I think, to come back to Tim's comment, we have to be centered in prayer. This issue is bigger than any of us. And we need to know that this is an opportunity for us to grow in our faith, to grow in our relationship with God, to set aside our own fears and anxieties, and to be at peace when we do the work of the gospel, which this truly is. And then tying in with what you were saying, Beatriz, I have found the immigrants that I have encountered to be a tremendous inspiration. I have grown because I've witnessed their faith, their trust in God, their tremendous ability to overcome things that seem impossible, even to the point of things that I can only imagine were miracles. They inspire me, and I have come to see the face of Christ in them. Wouldn't you love to see his face? Meet them, come to know them, and then bring them to God, and let God bring you to the world. From there, we'll change it.
Thank you. What a wonderful way to end our conversation tonight. Thank you very much. Before we close it out, I want to preview some upcoming dialogues that we're hosting. On February 27th, we're holding a joint Salt and Light and Latino leader gathering on Is Partisanship a Threat to Faithful Citizenship or a Way to Live It Out? And we'll be joined by John McCarthy and Luz Tavares and others. We're also organizing a major dialogue in March on the moral and human dimensions of efforts to dismantle USAID, with a particular focus on the work of Catholic sisters ministering to those who are hungry, sick, and poor around the world. Please visit our website to see recordings of these and other dialogues, and we'll have more information posted there as well. And you can also obviously see follow-up resources from this conversation at our site as well. I want to thank our colleagues at the Institute for the Study of International Migration in the Walsh School of Foreign Service for co-sponsoring this. Thanks, as always, to my colleagues John Carr, Kim Mazik, Anna Gordon, and Christian Sunin for helping to bring this important conversation together. Thanks to all of you who joined us here in person, those of you watching online. And I really want to say thank you to this community that's here. I see so many leaders in our audience on migration, and I would start to call you out, but I know I'm going to forget people because I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see those of you in the back. But I just see academic leaders, people who are working every day on this issue, people who've been working on policy issues and at ground level. And I want to thank all of you here who are doing this. And thank you, please join me in thanking those of us here on the panel, Cristina Pena, Alea Hertzler-McCain, Beatriz Ortiz, Tim Schultz, and Bishop Seitz for being part of this dialogue on migration, refugee resettlement, and mass deportation, moral, human, and policy choices. Thank you very much.